Chapter 53, Blood and Honor. Blood and Honor. Imoen saw Iridian to the door, nodding through the constant reiteration of directions and warnings.
And remember, you must wait at least a quarter hour before entering the apartments. I need to ensure Balliano is suitably distracted. Yeah, you've said twice already, now will you get going?
She gave him an encouraging shove into the hallway, the man motioning urgently for her to close the door as heavy-soled footsteps echoed along the corridor. Her curiosity had always been greater than her sense. Imoen pressed her eye up to the inch-wide gap she had left and watched Carrie-Ian jog to the nearby landing where Ethan was marching down the stairs. Both men stopped as they saw each other, their paces slowing as they advanced to meet on the landing between them. Ethan had clearly been planning to leave the keep dressed as he was, a heavy dark green coat with fine silver buttons glimmering at his cuffs and shoulders and the rising sun of Tether embroidered in red upon his breast. Iridian glanced over the taller man with a deliberate smile.
"Justice Ethan," he greeted, affectedly raising a hand to brush some unseen speck from the man's dark wool sleeve. "You are looking very smart. I did not know you were abroad on any official business." "Save your wit, Carrie-Ian. You asked me to attend you in the gardens and this is the only coat I have any need to own. But since I have had the chance to meet you here, what is it you want?" "Well, the gardens would be a better place for this."
Ethan cut off his stalling.
"Carrie-Ian, I have to leave with the dawn and have no patience for your games. You said you had business with me, speak it now or hold your peace." "Fair enough," Iridian sighed, "I was merely acting to save your face, not my own."
The man reached into his doublet to withdraw a fat leather purse.
"Here, some coin and assorted gems. My Lord Balliano was moved by your words at dinner regarding the safety of the roads. Though he regrets he cannot spare any of his own men outside his borders, he donates this to further improve the chance of recruiting more men to the local militias for the task."
Ethan's dark eyes narrowed with a frown. He weighed the purse gingerly, as though it contained something dangerous.
"That is very generous of him and also quite the change of heart. He has not been overly concerned of the lands outside of his own these last few months."
Carrie-Ian shrugged off his suspicions.
"It is not just you here who wishes to see Tether safe. Balliano thought such needed to be conveyed."
"Conveyed to the Justice or to Duke Farn?" considered Imoen. Along the corridor, Ethan voiced the same mistrust.
"Aye, and for whose benefit?" "Well, I would say for yours, since you now hold the gold."
Ethan just snorted.
"Indeed. I trust this concludes our meeting." "That it does," smiled Iridian, dipping a smooth half-bow. "Safe journey on the morrow. I doubt I shall be about at that hour to see you off."
Ethan said nothing, just turned to stomp back up the stairs to his own room further up the east tower while Iridian carried on, following the landing across to continue down the hallway opposite to his lord's apartments. A nervous quarter hour spent pacing later, and before Imoen knew it, she was in the hallway following him, the girl tripping along lamplit corridors with only the rustle of her long skirts and the distant sounds of the servants to compete with the thundering of her heart. She had considered changing into something more maneuverable, and then decided against it. After all, if she was caught it would be much easier to explain it away with being lost if she wasn't swathed in black with a cowl about her head. Balliano's apartments were on the same floor, but in the southern wing and far enough from her own to make an excuse hard enough to come by should she need one. In the gloom ahead of her, a door slammed, and for a moment she was frozen as the realization struck that she risked all they had come there for on the word of some man who had, but an hour before, at the arm of the one she now set out to betray and sneering along with him. With nowhere else to hide, Imoen instantly snuffed the lamp on the wide sideboard next to her and crouched into the shadows beside it. The footsteps were growing closer, and she risked a glimpse about the corner to see the two Calamshites marching along the hallway from the direction of Balliano's rooms, their whispering as furious as their pace, her translation jumbled in her panic.
Halaj do not, Zafir, wari telu dum. Farsin Perigilla quickly, Balthazar Razir wait.
That name and every inch of her skin bristled to match her back that was pressed against the cool stone wall. Did that monk's influence stretch so far as the men of Calamshan or? And suddenly that petty, dark-eyed face was recalled to her, Yumi's gravity belying her scant years as she had regarded the half-drunk mercs gathered outside the Zafir back in Amkithran, coarse laughter echoing about the shout.
What are you doing here? Your lot don't approve of the drink.
No, and neither had the Calamshites. The men were past her hiding place now, the cloud of perfume in their wake almost drawing her after them, their vibrant silks flashing under every pane of lamplight. At last, they turned a corner to disappear for their own apartments, and Imoen eased herself up, Iridian's letters and the seal making their presence felt with every heaving breath in her tight bodice as though to instill the weight of their importance. Imoen made her decision, Balliano first, then. The door was not locked, Iridian had assured her it would not be, the room it opened upon was about twice the size of her own and her feet made no noise on the thick rugs. A couple of lamps had been left lit, another of Iridian's courtesies, their soft light bringing out the lustrous sheen of the polished wooden furniture and blue velvet furnishings. From the door next to her, the sound of deep snoring was muffled, but audible. Imoen did not want to contemplate how the man had tired Balliano out so quickly. There was a bureau under the window, the lock simple enough for the picks she had hidden beneath her sash, and her heart was thudding like a blacksmith's hammer as she slipped the bundled letters and seal inside under a jumble of parchment and quills. Her work done, it was scant moments later when she was out in the hallway once more. Her body was trembling as it had no right to do considering the ease of the task, and as much to distance herself from enormity of what she could have just done as to reach her next target. She set off again at as much of a run as her dress would allow. The Calamshites had an apartment in the southern wing as well, but that was all she knew, Imoen travelling back to the corner where she had last seen them disappear. The lingering scent of their perfume showed the way, and she tripped the length of that corridor to take the only turning left onto a shorter hallway. A large arched window was at the end, the sky beyond the glass changing tones of black and grey as heavy clouds rolled across the moon. Under the last door of the corridor, a faint glow drew rich hues from the dark red carpet. She pressed an ear to the wood, and then to the keyhole when her first effort proved fruitless, but it was no use, the voices beyond too quiet to make out. Should she wait there for the light to go out and pick the lock? Her loitering outside their room was hardly something she could explain should someone discover her. Outside, the moon emerged once more from its tattered veil of clouds, pouring stark light through the window to cast the metal catch in finest silver. It drew her as though in a dream, the handle smooth under her fingers as she twisted it loose and the pane swung wide. The night was breezy and cool, a glance to the left confirming her hopes in stone but 2 yards along the outer wall. The Calamshites' position as honored guests had afforded them the luxury of a balcony, a set of huge glass-paned doors providing a likely glorious view over the river in the daylight. Lock-picks were shoved into her bodice and her sash slung over the cornice above, and then it was only a leap from the wide window-sill to the stone balustrade an arm's reach away. Light was slicing through the jewel-like blue pane of the curtains, enticing her through the darkness, though it seemed her efforts had been in vain. She could hear their voices a little better, but with the rush of the wind and the difference in language they were still just as unintelligible, and the glimpse she could snatch through the gap in the curtains told her nothing more. Alzine merely seated in a chair at the desk while Zafir prepared himself for bed. Imoen shivered, the balcony walls providing little shelter as the cold wind cut through her thin silk dress. She should have waited in the hallway, at least then she would have been warm. It seemed an age later when the light was at last put out. Imoen waiting another quarter-hour to be sure before she at last summoned her nerve and slipped through the latched glass doors. Zephyr was but a lumpy mound of blankets in the large canopied bed beside her, the faint glow from under the adjoining door showing her Alzine had yet to follow suit. Silence was imperative, though tramping about in the dark was likely to result in the clamorous opposite. Imoen summoned the faintest crumb of light, the last clinging flame of a snuffed candle that barely opened enough of the room for her to see her own feet. She had already memorized the layout while she had been waiting, and she put that knowledge to good use as she took 3 steps to the right to follow that wall to the desk. None of the drawers were locked, there was no need, they were all empty, the scattered notes upon it in Alzito merely merchants' receipts and reports from their guards. Thwarted, she turned her attention to the large chest beside the bed. The first few layers were the packed silks she had expected, the girl rummaging deeper to uncover the more serviceable clothes they had already admitted to traveling in. Frustrated, she was about to give it up as lost, when her fingers brushed something cold, and she drew into the light a large stone bottle. It was empty and of the usual type sold by shops and taverns, expensive enough that most returned them for the coin, and she loosed the stopper to sniff the inside. Water, not that she had expected anything else, Imoen weighing it dispiritedly in her hand a moment longer before making to shove it back into inside, her fingers brushing on the rough emboss of the brewer's mark that had been stamped into the base. The symbol of the cloud and about it the words that could mean everything and nothing, the Zephyr, Amkithran. The bottle tumbled from her fingers, her whole body tensed as the familiar rattle of a lock broke through the stillness. Someone was at the door, their difficulty indicating they did not have a key, and Imoen had dived sideways before she could think, the sagging mattress but inches from her nose as she found refuge under Zephyr's bed. The smooth turn of the lock end, on padding feet, the presence entered. Under the bed, Imoen tried to slow her breathing. What in hell's was going on? Who else suspected these men enough to break into their apartments? But perhaps she assumed too much. Perhaps it was some guard in their employ, or even a disloyal servant looking to acquire a piece of the pair's much-flaunted wealth. The presence was creeping closer, the soft footfalls pausing just beside her, so close she could have reached out and grabbed the ankle if she had wanted. Above her, Zephyr snorted in his sleep, only to settle once more with a sigh. The footsteps retreated, and Imoen was rewarded with an awkward glimpse of silhouetted boots as the adjoining door was opened, dim light flooding through the gap only to be extinguished by the creak of hinges. She lay still, fighting the impulse to make her escape then, when something patted on her forehead. On instinct, she raised a hand to investigate, the limb getting no further than her navel before the confines of the bed above reminded her of her hiding place. At her feet, the side door creaked open again, though no light heralded the movement. Imoen held her breath, another pat of liquid landing on her forehead to roll off into her hair. And just as abruptly as they had appeared the presence left in the click of a door. Imoen lay there long enough to count 100 before she was scrabbling from her hiding place, the balcony doors ignored in favor of a more direct escape route. Just an instant to cock an ear to the corridor and she was flying back along it to the safety of her own room. She had left all 3 of her lamps burning, and their sincere light was a comfort after the dark prowlings of her evening, the room just as she had left it, familiar clothes thrown over the chair, and pack open and ready for the morn. Something was happening, something outside her knowledge and Imoen stopped dead, frozen where she was bent throwing her lockpicks to land within her open pack as she caught her reflection in the dresser mirror, her forehead daubed in red like the anointments of some unholy temple. As though in a dream she moved closer, the patch on her head half dried to a scab by now to lose its vivid scarlet, though the little that had found its way onto her sleeve was still standing bright against the fuchsia silk. And in that moment it hit her, the Calamshites, by the monks or merely conspirators in Baliano's coup, were dead. 2 men were dead and there was nothing she could say, no alarm she could raise, no witness she could make without drawing attention to her own crimes. With nothing else to do, she pulled on her night clothes, the blood-stained sleeve of her dress left to soak in the fine porcelain wash basin, and Imoen took to her bed to lie unsleeping, waiting for the storm of the morning. The plain of checkered tiles stretched about her, green against green like the lawn of a particularly fussy gardener, while the sky above promised rain, grey clouds layered in serene strata so still it could have been a painted backdrop, and everything fuzzy about the edges. Frithha tried to focus, her eyes aching by the time she had realized it was the landscape, not her.
You know it won't be long now.
Age-old through her eye and into her skull, 3 figures were seated about her. Had they been there all along? The gaunt, grey face of the instinct smiled to her and plucked a card from the fan in her hand to toss it onto the pile before them.
We have time yet,
countered Saravak, just as coolly, and placed down a card of his own, the pair turning to the spiny, gore-black monstrosity next to them, a frown of concentration on the collection of teeth and spikes that served as his face as the essence glowered at his claw of tiny cards.
This, why must we? Arrghh. Yes, I know,
soothed the instinct, leaning over to assess his hand and make his play for him.
It won't be for much longer. Sister, it is your play.
Frithha started, gaze falling on a fan of talus cards that were in her hand. But the deck did not make sense, the suits and faces warped in a way she could not place. She threw down the tortured saint to collective sighs.
You know, Frithha,
continued the instinct, long amber curls brushed casual back over her shoulder as she leaned forward to collect a new card.
This would all be over, the torture of waiting, days pining for what could have been, if you just succumb to us now. We will take you on the path to victory. And all she is will die,
added Saravak hastily, as though worried she might be tempted. The instinct indulged him with a patronizing smile.
She will die anyway, the blood will take her once Melisande is defeated. All I am saying is, why suffer? Relinquish control to us, Frithha, and you will never have to feel this pain again.
Saravak threw a card down with a snort.
And who would accept such a deal? She has the chance to become a god in her own right.
The air rang with the instinct's derisive laughter.
Ha! Look at state of her. She'll never resist the blood. A murdered village pricking her conscience and she was halfway to him, risking everything to slaughter and burn in the name of her birthright. Yes, blood and fire. So,
snapped Saravak, he was clearly rattled now.
She still holds command of you. Is that what you believe?
The instinct trilled,
that because she comes here and speaks so sensibly to you, she is somehow in control? She is here because we allow it. She wants the darkness, give her any opportunity, any weakness, and she returns to us. I won't,
faltered Frithha, words slurring in the sluggish cant of a drunk.
I have to.
Her efforts went ignored, the instinct splitting the air with another shriek of laughter.
She will never be strong enough to tame it, and you, brother, you know you will have to return there once she does.
Saravak was on his feet, cards flung down in 4 suits of confetti.
I will never return there, never. Yes, fight now. You and your sister will succumb to us, spirit. My sister will crush you both.
Frithha's scream seemed to pulse across the very landscape.
Shut up, shut up, shut up.
Her eyes snapped open, blind in the piercing light, though the pain was secondary to the heaving wave that was swelling up from her stomach. An instant and Frithha was flipped over and scrabbling under the bed for the chamber pot to disgorge mouthfuls of bitter yellow bile.
Here,
came the sigh. She peered up through a veil of frizzy curls. Anomen was already awake, it seemed, sitting up in the bed opposite, the blankets pulled up to his chest against the cold as he leaned over to hand her his flask. She drew a gulp and spat it straight back into the bowl without so much as a good morning. It was hardly the case anyway. Anomen seemed to understand, his face wearing the sympathetic frown to which she was getting worryingly accustomed.
Do you recall much of what happened?
Fritha pushed the pot under the bed to fall back into the waiting cradle of crumpled blankets. Someone had stripped her to her linen underclothes and she was shivering in the morning's cool, but it was too much effort to get under the covers, her shallow breathing hoarse and rasping wetly with the lingering sick in her throat.
Enough to know I don't want to face you or Jar. You did nothing to shame yourself with me,
offered Anomen sharply,
and as for that dog, Jar, drugging you. He didn't drug me,
she cut in.
He offered it to me. I knew what it was. Then why?
Fritha sighed and fought another wave of nausea.
Because I was there and he offered and I thought, why not? I've never tried the lotus before, it would have been my last chance so I took it.
She glanced to Anomen with bloodshot eyes.
I'm sorry. It is fine,
he sighed, slumping back into the pillows, his weary tone making it evident it was anything but.
I merely do not understand why you are so stupid,
she provided tiredly. Anomen sent her a stern look.
Destructive. Do you even care what he could have done if your reaction had been any less? I know. Not what either of us had been expecting, from the look on Jar's face.
She snorted, though there was no humor in it.
I remember taking a couple of drags and then everything gets blurred. One moment he has me pinned against the barn wall pawing at me and trying to press his kisses, next he's flat on his arse and I'm somewhere else. It sounded as though you were arguing with someone,
offered Anomen evenly.
I don't remember. Jar knows our names now, too. Does he? Sod it.
Fritha sighed, but made no other movement outside of closing her eyes against the light, their gritty heat a stark contrast to her bristling skin, and she could feel the chill almost radiating from the exposed linen sheets around her. Any warmth her body had managed to imbue over the night soon lost to the cool air.
It's cold. Well, then get under the quilt. That's cold, too.
Anomen sighed deeply, the rustle of blankets forcing her eyes open once more to find him lifting the quilt next to him in resignation.
Here.
She patted over and crawled underneath, body uncurling into warm blankets and, for a blissful instant, she was transported to the sultry heat of the baths. Anomen jerked as an extended foot accidentally brushed his leg.
By helm, your feet are like ice.
She giggled wistfully, curling up once more to envelop herself a warm, dark nest.
Solifane used to say that I would catch him sometime by accident and he'd always yelp and hiss something in drow.
Anomen was looking down at her, she could feel his eyes moving over her profile from the mess of curls at her forehead right down to where her nose disappeared under the blankets. The question, when it came quiet and even.
Do you love him? Does it matter?
A deep sigh.
What do you want, Fritha?
She opened her eyes in time to see that melancholy look and, with great reluctance, she shifted higher, too, so the pair were seated in bed side by side like an old, married couple.
To be happy, I suppose. But it's so much harder to come by than it used to be. I used to be happy, all the time, even when I was upset or angry. It was like my heart was happy and just waiting for a chance it could bloom again. Now,
She sighed, pulling the quilt higher as a chill bristled across her shoulders.
Now I have to work at it, and inside, it's not there waiting anymore. But perhaps that's just how most people are, and before I was just fortunate. I'll be fine.
She continued briskly, feeling guilty that all she ever seemed to do with a no-man lately was take.
Once we're at the keep and have something to focus on. It's all this dem walking, gives too many quiet hours to think.
An instant to brace for it, and she heaved the quilt off with the same tense alacrity one would tear off a bandage.
Come on, we should get moving. I want this coming confrontation while I've still got a headache to distract me.
The air that morning was biting, any exposed flesh nipped and stung, and a no-man's face was hurting as soon as they had left the warmth of the common room. In the mist-wreathed yard, the mercenaries' cart was already being loaded, men milling about it with packs and supplies, while Ger stood overseeing things from the step of the wagon, just as he had been on that first morning in Al-Hali. Frithha was shivering again, though whether from the cold or the after-effects of her night, a no-man could not tell, the girl looking small and pitiful bundled up in traveling robe and 2 tunics, and for a moment he wondered if Jar wouldn't just gather her into the wagon and shout for wine and furs. But the captain glanced up, and any worry a no-man may have had vanished under his hard, and satisfyingly wary, scowl.
"Oh, you're here, Malal and Iorwerth,"
Jar exclaimed with a forced airiness in a no-man merely hoped he imagined the emphasis on their names.
"We weren't sure you were still traveling with us. We met a couple of mercs heading up to the keep last night after you retired, so I'm afraid your places have been taken. You know how it goes."
"Yes," agreed Frithha coolly,
"I know how it goes, you miserable whoreson,"
she added in a hiss as they turned back to the inn, her manner more sheepish as she glanced to him.
"Sorry, a no-man, looks like we're walking after all." "Do not look so downhearted, this is the first good news I have had in days."
A ripple of irrepressible laughter, and the girl dropped her throbbing head immediately to her hands.
"Ow, don't make me laugh."
"Come," a no-man chuckled, still smiling as a large hand gently ushered her before him,
"at least we can have breakfast now."
Imoen was ready when they arrived the next morning, dressed for travel and seated in the chair where Iridian himself had sat the night before. Was he still there? Had he fled? Had he even been the one who had murdered? Not that she had any sympathy for 2 men who, either way, had been planning the deaths of thousands. Still, it was the same feeling as before, that she had entered into something willingly and become a cog in a machine far greater and more malevolent than she could have known. Her stomach gave a miserable gurgle at the sharp rap of the door, unrest and hunger churning within, and she found no remedy in Jahara's worried frown.
"Imoen, thanks be,"
the druid breathed, Minsk looking just as relieved as he closed the door behind them.
"I knew you would be fine, but have you heard? Last night the 2 Kalimshite emissaries."
Imoen gazed down at her hands. They had killed before, but never like this.
"They were murdered, weren't they?" "Yes, the maid told us when she arrived to inform us breakfast would be sent to our rooms. She asked us to pass the
druid paused, her frown deepening.
"Did she tell you herself?" "No. I was there."
And the pair listened in pressing silence as Imoen talked them through the night's events, culminating with her gory discovery once she had returned to her room. Jahara had been on her feet since about halfway through the tale, wearing a trail in the rug as she paced back and forth before the mirror, while Minsk sat upon the bed opposite, the great man almost dropping his hamster as the druid suddenly whipped to them both.
"I do not need to explain the precariousness of our situation. If any of this can be pointed to us, we will not only be in danger, but we could jeopardize any chance of reinforcements being sent east." "Did anyone see you last night, young Imoen?"
asked Minsk gravely, who safely despotized back in his belt pouch.
No one. And when ARidian was here,
pressed Jahara,
were you with him the whole time? Was he always in view? He couldn't have planted anything in here while your back was turned. No,
Imoen answered on impulse, drawing back as doubts crept in, her memory suddenly hazy when once she had been so sure. Had there been a moment when she had turned or stooped or...
No,
she added more firmly. Jahara held her eye an instant longer and nodded, pressing on.
And there is nothing missing? You have all your jewelry, combs, bottles, I do not know, anything that was lying about from your toilette. No, I had already repacked most things before he had arrived. And your clothes, young Imoen,
added Minsk gravely,
you spoke of blood. A little on my sleeve, I soaked it clean though, you can't tell.
Jahara breathed a deep sigh and sank down next to Minsk.
Well, that is something, at least, and part of me considers that if the boy meant to accuse us, he would not have taken you into his confidence. So you think he did it, then,
murmured Imoen,
murdered the Kalimshites or monks or whatever they were. I do not know. But ARidian was abroad last night and he had plans enough himself. All that matters is that we escape this cleanly.
A knock at door put an end to their discussion.
That will be our breakfast,
sighed Jahara, sweeping aside the few of Imoen's belongings still scattered across the dresser. But the druid was wrong, Minsk pulling the door wide on a rigid formation of 4 house guards.
My lord, the Duke requests the presence of your group in the Great Hall.
How different the castle felt from the night before. Their 3 marched down bustling hallways, servants scurrying fearfully about their duties and flattening themselves back to the walls to allow them passage, the rattle of the guards' armor leaving the corridors echoing in their wake. Imoen's stomach was churning. What if ARidian was dead as well, or worse still, had somehow framed them for this crime? She should have just ran and told Farn last night. Told him everything and let the fates decide the outcome, and take the blame, the coward's course. The great hall where they had dined with Farn and his guests mere hours before was the same room, though the air about it could not have been more different. Gone was the easy camaraderie of old friends and vying outsiders. Farn was seated at the head of the table where he had been the night before, white-faced with a cold rage that seemed to focus upon the stout and spluttering man who had been brought before him, 2 of the castle guards still standing at either arm.
Give me again your version of events. Farn,
whined Baliano, his corpulent confidence nowhere to be seen now.
I have already.
The strike of Farn's fist against the table made them all jump.
Now. I sent Carrie-Ian out to fetch me a light supper from the kitchens. I must have fallen asleep before he returned. When I awoke in the morning he was gone. And this letter?
Farn snapped, throwing the offending square of parchment onto the table between them, a single spot of blood blotted on it like a seal.
Being written to you and found before the seated murdered body of Sarah Alzine.
Baliano gulped the air like a landed fish.
I told you. I do not know anything about this alliance it speaks of.
Another smaller scrap of parchment was tossed onto the table, its edges curled and black.
Then why were the cinders of a letter in your hand found in the grate? What correspondence could be so damning as to require its immediate destruction? My seal is missing and the lives of my honored guests have been taken in my own house, and I will have answers.
Baliano straightened his bulk with a rash indignation.
These letters were clearly planted, and likely by the murderer who took their lives. And by whom, Baliano? Who do you accuse? As I understood it, your aide, Carrion, dealt with all your personal correspondence and he is unfortunately missing.
A sneer twisted Farn's mouth, and it did not ease as his eyes found their trio grouped before the doors.
Ah, Imogen and her companions.
He made to beckon either them or the guards who still flanked them forward, their group moving to join the sweating Balliano before him.
Perhaps you can shed some light on the evening's events. One of the servants mentioned seeing you, Imogen, still roaming the castle well past midnight.
Me? Choked Imoen, where had she been seen and by whom? She could sense Jahara ridged next to her, every second she stalled making her lie more obvious.
Well, I went to visit the Kalimshites.
She faltered, Fritha always said the truth made for the best lies.
Before dinner they had offered to show me some of the jewelry they brought for trade. Jewelry?
Farn laughed,
you expect me to believe?
Imoen did not let him finish.
No, but you know why I have come here, my lord. If I could not get aid from you, then I have no choice but to seek it elsewhere.
Farn watched her with narrowed eyes.
And did you find it? No. No one answered at their apartments, I assumed they had retired.
Farn leaned back in his chair, any further questions forestalled as someone burst through the doors behind them.
My lord.
The Duke was suddenly bolt upright to greet his errant seneschal.
Marid, where in the nine hells have you been? I have been summoning you for the last hour. I came from the gardens, my lord. Last night Carrion found me after dinner, he asked me to meet with him under the southern arbor, that he had something important to tell me, worries about his loyalties being divided between his lord and Tether. He seemed afraid, though he swore he could show me proof of his words. I went last night, but he did not arrive. This morning, after I heard what had happened, I returned to the arbor. There are tracks in the gravel paths, as though someone had been dragged towards the jetties. No!
Cried Balliano, though Imoen was not sure if from grief or fear. Both Farn and Marid ignored him.
And this was crushed into a boot print in the dirt beneath the rose trees, there were obvious signs of a scuffle.
Marid drew something from his robes and the whole room seeming to peer forward to regard the fine silver button upon his open palm.
It bears the Tetheran coat of arms, most commonly found on the uniforms of those serving high in the army, or the crown's justice.
2 pink spots were rising on Farn's pale cheeks.
Bring Justice Dethan here this instant. I am sure you see now, Farn,
pressed Balliano,
I have had nothing to do with this.
Farn said nothing, and they waited in silence for what felt like a lifetime, Imoen desperately trying not to fidget as she felt the old Duke's eyes raking over his 4 suspects. At last, the creak of the door behind them, Dethan's gruff tones holding no hint of Balliano's panicked whine as he marched to join them at a pace his guards could barely match.
What is the meaning of this, Duke Farn? I understand a murder has occurred here, but I have been confined to the keep all morning and now this? I am already supposed to be on the road. We found this is his chambers, my lord,
continued Marid, dumping a large leather purse on the table with an affluent chink.
The purse is marked with the seal of Lord Balliano's house.
Farn took it up, weighing the leather bag in his hand to fix Dethan with a dark glare.
Where did you get this?
Dethan spared the fat nobleman at his side a confused glance.
Why, from Lord Balliano, via his aide Carrion. The lad told me it was a gift to help with the hiring of militia to patrol the roads outside his lands. I did not want his charity, but my pride should not see innocent travelers dead. So you saw Carrion?
Confirmed Farn.
At what time? About a half hour after we left your table. He had wanted to meet me in the gardens, but I caught him on the landing between mine room and his master's suites. Duke Farn, what is this about?
Farn left his question unanswered, his gaze slowly traveling between the two men, and it was with a sense of finality he nodded to Marid.
Take some men and search the Lord's rooms. If his guards resist, then you may act with any force necessary.
Baliano's fury was instant and predictable. Such an insult, from one noble to another, demanded no less.
The outrage! How dare you treat me as some common criminal? I am a lord of Tethur in my own right, your equal and your guest. You risk war with this indignity. Guards!
Barked the Duke as Baliano made to turn and quit their group. A tense moment of standoff, and Baliano slowly turned back to face his jailer.
Farn, how can you? We were friends. Our houses in alliance since before the war.
Farn merely sighed.
Yes. It seems I will have regrets here today whatever comes of this.
The moments dragged on. Baliano had been allowed to take a seat and was muttering crossly to himself, a handkerchief mopped over his sweating brow. Jahara and Imoen had been offered a similar courtesy though they had refused, the women instead standing with Minsk and Ethan in silence. Behind, the doors swung back once more, Marid marching through, the conquering general as they threw the spoils of his victory upon the table before the Duke, and Imoen felt her heart bob into her throat as he recognized one of the two bundles of letters and a fat gold seal. Baliano sprang from his seat.
Whatever you have there must have been planted. These were found locked in Baliano's desk, my lord, continued Marid. While this bundle was at the bottom of Carrian's linen chest. Consider!
Roared Baliano, two guards stepping up to hold him back.
Had I any damning correspondence I surely would have burned them. Indeed,
agreed Marid coolly,
though as you already said, it was Carrian who was responsible for all your scribing. He spoke of having evidence, perhaps letters you were entrusting him to destroy were being saved as his conscience grew heavy. Lies. They are clearly fake, Farn. Forgeries. Forgeries.
Snapped Farn.
And these notes on my troop movements are fake? And this letter from Sir Alzine accepting an invitation to your house is fake? This one,
he cried, shaking a square of parchments at him,
is from myself. You think I do not recognize my own hand? And this one?
He paused, eyes flying over the script.
This one would be my hand to any who did not know me well. It speaks of an alliance to drive back Kalimshite forces along the southern border, and then to consolidate our new base of power at the old capital.
Farn was suddenly on his feet, the letter flung into Baliano's purpling face.
That is why you needed my seal, you would show the other nobles you had my support one way or another.
Ethan was shaking his head.
You dog, I knew there was trouble along the desert, but I never suspected you would sell out your own people to the Kalimshites for more power. How quickly you condemn him, sir,
interjected Marid, the man producing another letter from his robes with that same cool composure.
I found this one on the floor just behind the door. It seemed someone had slipped it under at some point. When I found it, the seal was yet to be broken.
Farn scanned over the crisp parchment, his nostrils twitching.
Baliano. The Kalimshites will not be revealing our secret, nor will they be requiring further payments, I have made certain of both. Ethan. No.
Roared Ethan.
I never wrote such a thing to anyone, let alone to this dog. I
faltered Baliano, and Imoen could see the cogs within his mind turning, worrying over how to make this revelation work best for him. The shock he affected was almost convincing.
I cannot believe you would betray our cause like this, Ethan. I am ashamed to say I was blinded by my desire to help Tethur and may have overstepped the bounds of my friendship with you, Farn, in my eagerness to see you take a stand for this land, but murder. You were only ever eager for power,"
roared the justice.
"Do not believe him, Farn, I have had no part in this."
But Balliano was well into his role now as the dismayed conspirator.
"I thought us agreed, Dethan. The Calamshites were threatening to reveal our plans and I gave you that coin to silence them in good faith. I never believed you would resort to murder and keep the coin for yourself. You lying jackal! I know nothing of this."
Dethan looked wild and Imoen felt the tremble through her body, the desire to speak out against the injustice she was witnessing quivering through her. Jaehaera seemed to sense it, the woman's arm tightened about her elbow as though it could hold her tongue in the same manner. It had not been needed. The girl dipped her head and said nothing. Farn's disgust was audible.
"Guards, remove them to the dungeons. They will be held until their trial." "How dare you! Unhand!"
Balliano was struggling vainly with his guards though Dethan remained silent, and Imoen could not look as he was marched resolutely past them after the still roaring nobleman. Farn slumped back into his chair with a sigh, his gaze finally coming to rest upon their wary knot.
"Forgive my previous suspicions, the stain upon this house to have its guests murdered is more than I can say. You are, of course, free to return to your rooms as you will and depart when you wish. Though,"
he added hastily, as they made to heed his dismissal,
"please take a moment to speak with me before you leave. I believe there is something we must discuss."
Back in the privacy of her room and sat upon the bed once more, Imoen could not seem to lift her head from her hands, and even the slow rub of Jaehaera's hand upon her back felt muted through the numb weight upon her.
"I look back now, oh, why did I trust him? Young Imoen. And why? Why let Dethan take the blame? He had done nothing." "Nothing to us,"
clarified Jaehaera.
"He made it clear he was an ally to Tethur, but not necessarily the queens at dinner. Perhaps this was enough for Iridian. Besides, if he was to be believed innocent through his death, someone had to have murdered him and the Calamshites. I doubt Balliano has either the stomach or the physique."
Imoen shook her head.
"He used me. I planted the evidence to shift the blame from him to Dethan for the murder of those damn monks, and Iridian knew I wouldn't be able to say a word of it to Farn." "You were not to know,"
soothed Minsk. Imoen snorted.
"No, but I know now, don't I? We all do, and we're just going to sit back and let an innocent man be executed." "Farn will not kill him outright,"
reasoned the druid gently.
"There will need to be a trial, a message to the Queen will have to be sent in the very least. Once we have secured Farn's support and this war is over, there may be time yet to clear Dethan's name."
Imoen raised her eyes, needing to see the weight of their decision reflected in another's face.
"And what if there isn't?"
The druid winced and turned away, Minsk sighing as he planted a heavy hand upon her shoulder.
"War takes its tithe in blood and honor."
End of chapter.